Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Molly Cooper, Features Editor at The Manufacturer, and I'll be the host today. This webinar is brought to you by NLX, and I'm joined by Wayne Davis, Head of Flexibility, and Gareth Ball, Head of Sales and Marketing. Today we'll be discussing the value of virtual power plants for manufacturers. I'll now pass over to them to get started.
Thanks, Molly. Great to be here, and thanks everyone for joining as well. We're here today to talk about virtual power plants and how they're bringing value to the UK manufacturing sector. And really to start with and to set the scene and provide some context, energy as a whole, and I think particularly with manufacturers, the energy category has been viewed as simply a necessary operational cost that's incurred. It's part of the process. But that is changing, and energy is increasingly becoming something that businesses can really optimize strategically. And what we'll discuss today is how small operational or load adjustments can really help create commercial value for manufacturers. And maybe a bit more broadly, flexibility can help and is helping the manufacturing sector become more competitive, more resilient to energy fluctuations, and also help businesses that participate with their electrification plans as well. So today's session explores how virtual power plants, or VPPs, can help coordinate that value and unlock it for businesses.
We hear a lot about electrification and net zero, but why is flexibility suddenly becoming such an important topic for manufacturers specifically?
Thanks for that, Molly. I'll jump straight in there. Well, let's be brute about it. Energy markets have changed. They've changed really quickly. And what's really driving this at the moment are three really important pieces. The first of them is electrification. We're seeing a huge demand at the moment from EVs, heat and industrial processes, as well as the wider decarbonisation projects that are out there. All of these have an increase on our electricity demand. For manufacturers especially, this means electricity is becoming more and more critical to your day-to-day operations and future growth plans, increasing the pace at which businesses can electrify, expand production capabilities, and also deploy new technologies. It's influenced by the amount of power available to their sites, though. If that is limited, there are issues. Being able to manage your electricity demands more efficiently across operations, therefore, can help support these 3 points more and more, not just the electrification, as I've mentioned there, but the other two that we're showing on screen, which is the Clean Power 2030. This is a change being brought in by NESO, by Ofgem, by DESNZ, by the government really, to try and push what we're trying to do and to get to a cleaner environment by 2030. What will that mean? It will mean we need to increase the flexibility that we have in GB by the level we're at the moment, sort of 2.5, 3 gigawatts to over 12 gigawatts. It's at least a 4 times change that we're actually looking for over the coming years. But then the third one is the ongoing volatility. Energy prices and supply are increasingly influenced by geopolitical events, market disruption, and wider uncertainty, making both cost and operational risk harder to manage. These used to be seen as a black swan event, once in a lifetime, but we've had Brexit, COVID, as well as the two conflicts in Ukraine and Iran over the last 10 years. These are not once in a lifetime events anymore. These are now normal market events. Taken together, these force changes to the role of energy. It's no longer just about how much energy is consumed. It's about how flexible and efficient you can be. That's why flexibility has become such a critical part of the future energy system, which we'll try and look at next.
One thing I find interesting here is that the same forces creating risk are also creating opportunity. So why is flexibility becoming more valuable than maybe it was, say, 5 years ago?
So is it more valuable than it was 5 years ago? I would say no, it's not more valuable than it was five years ago. It's as valuable. It's more accessible than it was 5 years ago, is where I'd really put it at the moment. Now, again, I've broken this down into three areas. The first one's risk. Businesses are more dependent on electricity. Operations become more exposed to that market volatility, network constraints, and the wider uncertainty that's there. That can make planning and operational decisions more difficult, particularly for energy intensive sites or businesses looking to electrify further over time. The second part is cost. They're becoming a lot more harder to control. It's not just that energy prices are rising, they're becoming less predictable, which makes managing energy spend a lot more difficult than it used to be. But then the third one is the opportunity. And this often gets overlooked, but in a way, that opportunity can add to those first two, the risk and the cost.
Yeah.
Yes, there's more risk there. Yes, there's a lot more cost maybe involved, but we can actually look at businesses managing and being a lot more flexible and optimized to be the most strategic that it can be. Now, when you actually break that down, it all comes back to the same thing. It's flexibility, not just in theory on how your operation could run day to day, but how your operation actually runs day to day. You can start to adjust when you use your energy, even slightly, and that can create something huge, which we'll go into a little bit more as we go further through this webinar. But the challenge is not where flexibility exists. It's already there. The challenge is how you can access it and what we can do. And that's where the virtual power plant comes into it.
Yeah, so we're hearing the term VPP or virtual power plant, as you mentioned in the beginning, quite a lot, and it does sound a bit technical. So what does this actually mean?
Yeah, Molly, I can take this. I've heard, being in the industry, I hear lots of different explanations of what a VPP is or a virtual power plant is. I think in a very simple or its simplest level, a VPP is a community of energy assets and small electricity loads that can interact with the grid to help provide resiliency and stability, whilst giving the participants, or the guys and businesses and manufacturers providing that energy, a commercial benefit. And really how they've come about is another important point. Like, VPPs weren't a thing 15, 20 years ago, but really they reflect something that Wayne was talking about before, which is this shift away from a very traditional centralized energy system towards a more decentralized and flexible network of connected assets and loads of responsive demand. Now, historically, and this is an important point, like historically, grid stability relied really heavily on building very large centralized sources of power stations to meet what could be quite ad hoc peaks in electricity demand. But rather than do that now, actually having energy flexibility is becoming that alternative to larger power plants. So adding more flexibility stops us needing more large-scale generation capacity. So instead of only producing more electricity, the system is actively now looking and rewarding businesses that can either intelligently adjust when their energy is used or optimize their current processes on their sites and operations. Now, as I said before, this flexibility really helps balance the grid more efficiently, really, whilst reducing the pressure on the infrastructure and future generation requirements that Wayne touched on before. Now, where NL sit in this matrix, if you like, is we act as the coordinator across this community of smaller assets and manufactured and aggregated loads, and really the wider electricity grid.
Gareth, I'll just jump back in there as well, and just add something. Is, we've mentioned in this conversation a couple of times flexibility and being able to change, etc. I just want to give people an idea. Is there's 8,760 hours in a year. Now, flexibility to somebody, let's be honest, could just be 20 hours a year. It could be such a small point to what they're actually doing. So, I don't want people to think that, I want to be part of a virtual power plant. I need to be ready, thousands, hundreds of hours a year to be able to change things. We're talking slight changes that people need to make.
Exactly. And it actually flows really well into the next slide. So I think a question, Molly, to jump in here, is usually what we get asked quite often is, what type of specific manufacturer or specific process or specific business is a good fit for flexibility? And the answer is there isn't. It is a really broad spectrum. there are a very, very diverse customer base on our books that we deal with across the globe, across every sector and really process that you can think of. Now, what does vary is like the type of flexibility across our customers, because it depends on lots of variables, but ultimately how the site operates or what products that they're producing. So rather than go into like every single example on the screen here, to pull a couple about food manufacturing, well, refrigeration and thermal storage can create flexibility opportunities. It's a really popular and common industry that we deal with. In heavy industry, processes involved with steel, cement, even glass manufacturing, they can allow controlled load shifting or operational adjustments that can equate to flexibility, which is valuable. Even continuous processes, which is again like a common blocker, I think, for a lot of organizations to get to grips with. Even these continuous processes like chemical production or paper production, more often than not, we can work with them and identify large electrical stable loads that can provide some flexibility somewhere along the line. It can be optimized. Now, the common theme across all of our customer base, it really doesn't matter what they do, what they produce, or how they operate. What our goal is not to shut the site down. That's not what we do, back to Wayne's point. It's about adjusting behaviors more often than not, and really where we can sort of introduce controlled operational flexibility changes or shifts. And this is why I think flexibility is no longer limited to one sector or technology that we've mentioned. It's really becoming relevant across most, if not all, manufacturing operations.
Again, just to jump in again there, Gareth, and I totally agree with what you're saying. And the magical word there was shift as well. Is we're not always looking to just curtail and lose that there. We can shift energy from one part of the day to another. So if certain processes are there, I'm looking at some of the ones you've got on screen at the moment, we can quite easily shift the usage from one part of the day to another, while still keeping up with the demand that's needed at the site. They have X amount that they need to produce. What we can actually do is shift that energy around a little bit.
So I think my next question would be is that we've talked about the processes and you've mentioned the sectors there, but what type of assets can be used?
So when we're talking about assets, we've got the assets that are there at site. You've got your manufacturing pieces, your different lines, your production lines, etc., which maybe we've talked about adjusting the production side of things. But what I also want to talk about is using your other assets that you have there. So I've got 4 up on screen here, and I'll try and touch on all of these a little bit for you. So you've got things like EV chargers. Now, most people would just consider EV chargers as the one you have for your car at home, which generally you're probably only charging between midnight and 6 a.m. to take advantage of your cheap rates. But EV chargers are now becoming more and more within businesses as well. So you have fleets. Some of you may have fleets out there as well that you need to run, and you're charging some of those maybe during the day. And what we can actually do is almost look at these as mini batteries in a way, and how we can actually use those within what we're trying to do as an asset. We then move on to the next one there, which is CHP. So some of your sites might be getting your heat from a CHP. So you're taking the heat there. You've got the need for the production pieces that you have. But of course, what that's actually doing is creating electricity as well. So there is the possibility of, you're taking the load off of the grid. But what we could actually do, there are times of the day where we actually want to give more back to the grid, or take more control, which is we could then turn off maybe the CHP or lower the demand on the CHP and actually pull more energy from the grid and actually get paid for it. The third one along there is heat pumps. Now, heat pumps are a key part of the electrification that we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing people move away from the likes of CHPs, if there's not the heat need, and they're moving more and more across to the heat pumps, which generally are a lot better for us. They're not burning the fossil fuels that maybe a standard CHP is. Now, those heat pumps can react really, really quickly in some of the programs that we're actually looking at. And there might not be a need for that to be running 24/7. It might be that we can shift the load slightly on that heat pump. It might be that we can turn down that heat pump or turn it off for a very short period. So they're very, very key to what we're doing. And then the fourth one along, and is almost the holy grail in a way. It is a battery, so BESS. So we've got that battery energy storage systems there. This is having a battery on site. Now, let's be brutally honest. We hear about all of these big, huge batteries going in, a gigawatt here and a gigawatt there, the utility scale ones that are key to what we're doing. But a BESS in a manufacturing term is maybe just having that behind the scenes, a 1 megawatt battery, for example, a 500 kilowatt battery that just sits there and is also part of the resilience that you need. You may previously have had an old diesel generator that's coming to the end of its 20-year life. Now people are starting to put BESS in, which allows them to take advantage of a lot of the different programs and schemes that are out there at the moment.
Yeah, I think just to add one thing on the batteries as well, I think another use case, which is, I think, becoming increasingly common is, and it's linked to electrification. One of the challenges with electrification is the fact that, yes, it's decarbonising a production process, for example, or a type of energy consumption, but they're also more energy intensive. And what we find is that a lot of manufacturers, a lot of businesses want to electrify, they want to put a heat pump in, they want to put EV chargers in, but they simply haven't got the grid capacity in that particular area that allows them to do that. They have a maximum import capacity where they're topped out at the moment, and if they do want to put a heat pump in, it's going to go up here. So actually having a battery on site is it's a way to help meet that challenge and address that challenge as well, to give a site additional capacity.
Yeah, thank you. I think all this information is great, but with manufacturers having multiple options open to them, in terms of programs to participate in, how do they know which one will suit them? More importantly, how do they ensure that they get the most value from participating?
I'll jump in again there, Molly. Historically, most of the businesses we see approach flexibility through maybe a single program or a market. They may have heard or seen the capacity market, or they may be in DFS, but that's not the way it should be viewed, in my opinion. This is where we look at an owl really being the conductor of an orchestra who guides each of the markets. So, for example, energy markets are buying and selling energy on a day ahead and an intraday and carrying out some non-physical trades as well. And then you have something like the capacity market. It's a payment to support the long-term security of the grid itself and to reduce the chance of blackouts out there. We then have other parts of that orchestra, such as the ancillary services. They can be the newer frequency response products that really need you to respond in maybe sub 1 second, really, really quick, through to the newer reserve markets, which response time on those, starts to go out to 1 minute, 10 minute, 15 minute, but then, all of this comes together with things like the customer benefits. So it's not just you earning money, it's you saving money as well. We can look behind the meter and see what can be done to actually reduce those costs. Taking away high red distribution bands, for example, and shifting that energy, as I mentioned earlier, to cheaper green periods, and making sure that other non-commodity levies that are out there, and we can try and reduce those as well. But again, the way I look at it is that we appreciate that doing this and trying to manage all of this internally within a business and running your operations at the same time is going to be very, very difficult. So what we try and do is continuously monitor the markets, understand where the value exists, and coordinate how your assets would actually participate. We'll continue to monitor, manage, and deliver whilst working with your business constraints over time to maximize the value that we see. The key takeaway from this, at the top of the screen there, is access the right markets at the right time so it is financially beneficial to yourselves.
Yeah, I think just to add to that slightly, Wayne, as well, I think, when we talk to businesses and manufacturers across, regardless of what particular sector they're in, we tend not to look or discuss particular programs in a great level of detail. This is the way we position this and talk about it is joining the virtual power plant is the very first step is figuring out what your site can and cannot do. What are your absolutely non-negotiables for your loads or processes, for example? And the programs, there's really three key things with any energy market program. It's how quickly do participants need to respond? How long do they need to respond for? And how frequent are these events? So once we get an idea and can work with the business to find out what exactly is happening on their site and what can be optimized, we fit the programs around that rather than the other way around. So it is once you're on board, it's a particular customer doesn't know what market they may be participating in that particular day, but as long as they're participating within the parameters that have already been set and we're constantly in communication with them, they always have ultimate control over whether or not they participate. But this is the idea of a virtual power plant. It's you join the plant and we try to get as much revenue for the business as we can whilst not interrupting your operations.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so what potential values are available for manufacturers? I know you spoke about a few there, but if you can tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, there's a couple of examples on the screen here. Now, the reason why we pick these examples is that they can really show how flexibility can look very different depending on the sector, the process, and particularly the technology involved as well. So the example on the left is a milling business, and they participate through simple operational curtailment across several different sites, singularly, not a very large volume of energy per site, but when aggregated together is very valuable. So we coordinate that flexibility from their milling operations and production processes. And the value that we can bring for them, in fact, both of these examples is over £1 million over a 5-year term. So it is really sizable. On the right-hand side, it's slightly different participation. So this manufacturer produces in two ways, and for curtailment across some operations, but to Wayne's point earlier, they've installed a heat pump across one of their largest facilities, which again, this is becoming increasingly common as businesses electrify heat and wider operations. So they've enrolled the heat pump, and also they can curtail some of the processes. But again, the value here, well over £1 million over a 5-year term. And I think what is important here is that neither business is using exactly the same operating model or technology approach. It is broad. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And in terms of where that value is derived from, Wayne, I don't know whether you want to
I
deeper look.
I was just about to jump in there, Gareth. So let me sort of take that as these are two completely different operations. The one on the left, the UK milling business that we've got there, site capacity is across multiple sites, but we're talking about 5 megawatts in total over multiple sites. Well, the key thing when the team went and visited this client and worked with them and looked at their energy reduction plans that they've put in place, and when I say an energy reduction plan, this is, we'll walk around the site and we'll understand all of your constraints and build up something to understand exactly what you can do. They told us that, yes, that, they could respond in 4 hours. That's great. It's a tick to certain programs. They said they definitely couldn't respond any quicker than that. If they could get a day ahead notice for something, then that would be great. So this allows us to look at multiple programs, take all of those constraints into our business model, and actually work out exactly what the client can do. Now, the difference really on the one you mentioned, the heat pump that we've got there, and this is just a couple of sites. One site's got the heat pump, the other can do other things, is that they've told us that heat pump can be turned off in seconds, basically, if it's needed to. And of course, they don't want to turn it off all of the time in seconds, but for certain programs, they say, yeah, we can do that. And what we've actually been able to do is work with them to actually enroll them in a certain program that says, hey, if we can turn this off very, very quickly, but only maybe 10, 15 times a year maximum, then they can take advantage of that. So again, going back to that, the key thing is working out an energy reduction plan and really finding out
Yeah,
what a customer is comfortable to do.
yeah, spot on.
So, just finishing from this, how important is global experience when managing something as dynamic as flexibility markets?
Yeah, I guess in short, very. So, one of the questions that we get asked is who are NLX? And NLX are part of the wider NL group, actually one of the largest integrated energy companies across the globe. What does that mean? It means across our portfolio, we've actually got under management, as of reasonably recently, over 10 gigawatts worth of flexible energy globally, which is a very, very large number. Like, what does that mean? Well, simply, it means that we've got experience across pretty much every sector, every manufacturing process, every operational process that you can think of, along with having a really deep understanding of the energy markets, the regulatory requirements and shifting space that is as well, because that moves very, very quickly. I think another reason why a lot of customers use us is that we can work with customers that only have a UK location, but if they have a global footprint, we can also centralize their global flexibility strategy as well, which is very, very useful because it essentially means less points of contact for them. And our global, so all of that 10 gigawatts worth of energy is managed through our Global Network Operations Centre, our NOC in Dublin. Now, these guys, it's 24/7 manned, operated. They continuously monitor, optimise and coordinate participation in real time, regardless of where those sites are located.
Okay, so thank you for all of that. But where do manufacturers go next after listening to this webinar today?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. Look, ultimately, whilst we have all the experience in the world and we can talk about different operations and different processes and different sectors, etc., ultimately the first launching point, or the launching point rather, is to get in touch for a conversation with us. Our customers or potential customers know their sites and operations a hell of a lot better than we do. We don't know anything from the outside looking in. So the first step is really to organise a conversation and a site visit to do a walkthrough. Wayne talked about the energy reduction plan before. Again, you know your sites, or they know their sites better than we do. It's the most valuable and the easiest, I guess the efficient way of doing this is to organise a site visit to walk us through, do a deep dive on your operations, and then we can take that information away and start looking at what might be achievable, and more importantly, put a value around it as well.
Just to follow up a little bit on that, Gareth, as well, which is, it's key. And, I don't want to scare people off with all of the different markets and the timings that I mentioned on how quickly you need to do is, this is a strategic relationship that we look to have with clients. And it might be that you dip your toe in first and then you look to expand there. But that can't happen until that initial conversation and we've looked at it and understood your operational priorities and all of the constraints that you have. So that first step is, speaking to somebody and looking where we can go next.
Thank you, Wayne and Gareth and NLX for today's webinar. Their details are now on the screen, as you can see, so please do reach out for any more information on what you've heard today or any questions you may have as well. This webinar will be available on demand over at the manufacturer website, so you can watch it anytime and anywhere. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.